They calmly call the AAA. You got nothing to prove. That's in all things. It's all in the groove. All in the groove.
It is indeed all in the groove, and that's what we bring you with the best bumper music known to man. I'm learning this opening harmonica riff of John Popper of Blues Traveler. Welcome back to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show. He's tough to try to figure out. So good. As we continue on News Talk 710 KNUS. So we are seeing here Democratic presidential caucus in Nevada, Bernie Sanders currently with over 50% of the vote, with about 7% in. It is quite a fascinating presidential primary season on the Democratic side of the aisle, and I am very pleased to welcome to the show one of the contenders who is currently out and about in Utah. We've got Congresswoman from Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard, running for president of the United States. Congresswoman, welcome to the show. Good to talk with you.
Aloha, Jimmy. Great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
Aloha. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And let me ask you first and foremost, how do you see this presidential primary process unfolding now? I mean, it does look like Bernie Sanders really very much in the lead. You're one of the candidates, though. What's your takeaway right now?
I think that we have seen 3 states out of 50 plus the territories that have voted. It is still very early in this process. We're looking at some of the outcomes that we've seen. The predictions that we've heard even a month or 3 months or a year ago have all been proven to be wrong. So I make it a point to not be in the pundit business and just continuing to focus on getting our message out to voters, to supporters, so that when they do go to the polls, next stop South Carolina, and then obviously Utah and other Super Tuesday states on March 3rd, they can make the best informed decision on who they'd like to see as our Democratic nominee.
So in terms of sort of where the Democratic Party is at right now, it certainly seems to be in many ways diametrically different from the Republican Party, although there are some candidates like yourself, Tulsi Gabbard, who seem to have some areas of common ground still at this point. Where do you see, first of all, the Democratic field being right now ideologically, and then also the country in terms of these divisions that we at least see played out so much on television?
I think when you look at the Democratic Party, while there may be some loud voices, I think what's important to recognize is that the party is actually pretty diverse and different views, different thoughts or ideas on how to solve problems. And it's not a single kind of monolithic group of individuals. And so this really points to the reality that voters in this Democratic presidential primary really do have a clear choice. There are very clear distinctions and differences between us as candidates, different sets of experiences and qualifications that we bring to the role of commander-in-chief. And you're right, throughout my campaign, what I have been doing, continuing to do is break through the hyper-partisanship, the polarization, the whole us versus them divisive mentality, and invite all Americans to come and work side by side, treat each other with respect, and recognize that our bond consists of our values, our roots, enshrined in the Constitution of the United States. And so even as we will have different ideas on how we solve different problems, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We should be having these discussions, keeping an open mind, treating each other with respect, even having fierce or strong debates so that we can best get to that place where we're delivering a real workable solution for the American people.
We're talking with Democratic presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard. And before we switch over to a particular issue of the day, which is student loan debt and higher education costs that I really want to dive into with you. I'm curious, for those unaffiliated voters who are listening or ready to vote in the Democratic primary, which they can do here in Colorado, or Democrats who've seen that you're coming on the program. We do have some Democrats who listen on a regular basis here on Saturday nights as well. What's your message to them as they are in this home stretch of the next couple weeks figuring out, okay, who am I going to vote for president in this primary?
Now is the time for a new generation of fresh leadership, a fresh perspective on how we tackle the challenges that we all face, backed up with experience in 2 important ways. Number one, to serve as commander-in-chief of our armed forces, being entrusted with that most important responsibility to ensure the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. And secondly, the experience that comes from being able to work with Congress across party lines, Republicans and Democrats, to actually deliver results, actually pass legislation that will get things done. Unfortunately, it's something that we haven't seen in Washington for a long time. I bring experience in both of those areas throughout my service in Congress, the first 6 of which have been under Republican majority in the House, and been able to actually deliver those results, to pass legislation, combined with the personal experience that I have both as a soldier for almost 17 years, 2 deployments to the Middle East, and a strong focus on national security and foreign policy in Congress that's best equipped me with that experience to walk in on day one and serve as Commander-in-Chief.
And by the way, I do want to thank you for your service overseas. We definitely appreciate it here on 710 KNUS. One thing that I want to note is you and I share one particular thing in common, which is that we're both millennials. Now, I would call you an elder millennial, and I'll be 30 in August, so I'm somewhere in between. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
You're right.
And I think that there's something so interesting about the millennial generation, except for those who tend to be more on, on partisan lines, who are looking for red meat, going after each other, that our generation tends to be less combative in personal conversations and so forth, a little more risk averse, and not very prone to shouting matches.
Thinkers.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And thinking for ourselves outside of the boxes or the institutions that our parents grew up in and lived in, and really thinking about, okay, well, we've been dealing with these problems for so long. Maybe what you're doing all along hasn't been working, and we need a new approach. I agree with your assessment, and I think that even as there is a vocal group of individuals who are of our next generation of leaders who are choosing kind of the extreme paths, I think it's a vocal minority, and vast majority of millennials and young people really are just looking at, hey, what works? What do we got to do to get some stuff done?
So there was a question on Twitter that I saw your answer for that particularly precipitated my outreach to your campaign, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, again, Democratic presidential candidate, joining us on the Jimmy Sengenberger Show. And the question was this from NBC Asian America, talking about college debt. Quote, what steps will you take to reduce student debt so that it increases our chances of competitive workforce opportunities? How will you ensure our communities that they have access to the programs you seek to create toward this end? We're at nearly or more than now $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. It's an astronomical number. College costs continue to rise. What's your overall answer to that? And then we'll delve in a little bit deeper.
The answer is we have to make it so that whether it's a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or going to community college, vocational training, apprenticeships, entrepreneurial approaches, that we've got to look at how we can make any of these avenues more accessible and affordable to every single American, period. Right now, obviously, we're seeing that's not the case. There's a larger societal issue that I think needs to change, where we have an expectation that unless you go and get a 4-year degree or a master's degree, that you're not going to be successful in life. We're not all made the same. Some people want to go to college to get a degree for a certain reason. Other people don't want to have anything to do with it and would rather go directly into learning a specific skill that they want to work in, a profession that they want to join. And our value as individuals, as Americans, has nothing to do with what kind of piece of paper we got because of what school we went. It has to do with our intrinsic value and who we really are. So being able to change that expectation lifts that pressure from people who are graduating from high school thinking, oh my God, I have to go to college. I don't know what I want to do, what I want to study, what I want to do with my life. But all of a sudden you're faced with a situation of having to take on $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 or more in student debt.
I think that's such an important point that I completely agree with, where our society's finally coming around to this notion that it's not just a college-only track to look into, or just college-only and military maybe is the one alternative. I remember thinking in high school, I figure I would be in a college track regardless for my own circumstances, but I remember only hearing that the alternative option would be military service, which is wonderful to be presenting to young people, but there wasn't this idea or talk of trade schools or apprenticeships and those kinds of things. And I think finally we're starting to see a little bit more of a conversation in that.
This is true. And I think it's a wonderful thing because it allows people to either try different things as they're trying to figure out, what profession or what career path or what they want to do with their lives. And once again, to have the freedom to be able to make those choices without being saddled with this student debt for most, if not the rest of their lives. I think there are some very specific steps for those who choose to go down this path that I think we need to take to rein in this ever-increasing cost of higher education. I think technology is heavily underutilized in the opportunities that exist to reduce the cost of the delivery of a quality higher education to students. It's something I actually did most of my bachelor's degree through distance learning and online classes while I was deployed to Iraq and during my second deployment as well to Kuwait. And if I can make that happen while studying and taking tests in a tent in our camp in Iraq with mortars flying overhead, a long time ago, it shows what's possible for us to be able to expand that reach and reduce the cost of the delivery of higher education.
Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, our guest here on the Jimmy Sengenberger Show. Let's talk about the existing debt burden for a moment. One of the things that I don't think is being talked about very much, there were more people talking about it maybe a couple of years ago. Now on the Democratic side, you particularly have forgiveness of student debt. On the Republican side, there are a lot of Republicans who don't touch this issue for some reason, which I really think is a mistake. And I still have about $15,000 in student debt that I'm carrying. I don't plan on any sort of bankruptcy. It's not that high, but there are a lot of people with, say, 6 figures of debt that find it virtually impossible to discharge their student loan debt in bankruptcy. And it is the only form of consumer debt that is that difficult, if not impossible, to discharge. You and I agree on this point of restoring the ability. Why do you think that's important?
It's critical. It's critical to be able to provide that option for people who feel like they are at their wits' end and they need to hit the restart button. The fact that student debt is really the only debt that's excluded from those who are filing bankruptcy being eligible for that, I think just points to the heavy influence that these financial institutions have on our policymakers, that this exception was built in so that they could be guaranteed, knowing that there is no way out for those who take on this debt to try to pursue a higher education or further their professional opportunities. It's crazy. Right along with this, we have to really address the increasing interest rates that are there with those who have these student debt loans. Oftentimes only being able to pay interest rates, seeing those interest rates ever increasing. I met a young couple, both were teachers, both trying to pay off their student debt, went and tried to refinance their student debt loans to get a lower interest rate. And the financial institution basically said, no, it's not in our interest. It's not in the bank's interest to lower your interest rate. So you're stuck with no option. Our education is something that we should be supporting and investing in as a country and finding ways to be able to help make it so that it's affordable and accessible for everybody.
What do you think, though, about the notion, this is one of the things that I say we should do for future borrowers. You can't do this ex post facto for existing borrowers, but for future borrowers, tying a percentage of the losses for any default or discharge of bankruptcy of student debt to the institution that student graduates from. In other words, if they take out student loans, then that institution is in effect a co-signer. One of the things that I think is lacking is the incentive for college or university to encourage students to graduate with majors that will help them get jobs and so forth. And I think that this is one of the benefits of restoring bankruptcy protection that also makes them, in essence, a co-signer on the loan, so to speak.
Idea. I have not heard that idea floated before, but I agree with the concept of it, that the higher education institutions who are increasing their tuition rates need to have some skin in this to both, help ensure the success of their students as they're graduating. They can go and they can get a good paying job and they can repay their tuition, their student loans, but also that they, as higher education institutions, need to be closely connected to the needs of our economy.
Yes.
So it's setting the students up for success, but it's also saying, hey, guys, here is the job market of today, and here's where we're seeing it going in the next 5 years and 10 years as you're thinking about your major and what skills you want to produce. So our schools are actually producing the workforce of not just today, but of tomorrow.
Just a couple more minutes with our guest, Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman from Hawaii and Democratic presidential candidate. A lot of your colleagues on the presidential debate stage have been proposing some form of forgiveness, but I didn't see that in your answer. I don't hear you saying that. You're suggesting bankruptcy for those who want to be able, who are so deeply in debt and really otherwise they would just default. Why not forgiveness? Why not jump on that bandwagon?
Because it solved the problem, Jimmy. That if you could wave a magic wand and forgive every single person's student debt today, what about the kids who are graduating next year or in 5 years or in 10 years? We're going to continue to see this same problem persist if we don't deal with the root cause of the problem, some of the things that you and I are discussing here. Look, I think there's an opportunity for us to look at tuition forgiveness for teachers, for example, who are needed in underserved communities who can't recruit teachers to go and teach our kids, or nurses. We're facing a vast nursing shortage in this country if we're not graduating the nurses needed to meet the needs of providing care to our people. So we look at these essential areas and say, okay, maybe there's opportunity for a civilian version of the GI Bill, where if you go and commit, I will serve, let's say it's 5 years in an underserved community as a teacher in an area of need, then we'll pitch in and help pay off your student loans. Programs like that, I think, could go a long way towards fulfilling the service and the needs that we have in this country.
Well, I know we talked off air about how I will make sure that work with your folks to make sure that you get some of the research that I've done, and I appreciate your invitation to take a look at that. I know that the Democratic presidential primary here in Colorado is just a little over a week away, but I would love to continue the conversation on this topic because I really think there's a lot of common ground in certain areas. I think if we explore this issue more, there will be some areas where we disagree. But on those areas of common ground, we need to be making headway because $1.6 trillion in student debt that's holding back millions of people is something we can't just push under the rug.
And I would love to be able to continue this conversation, to work with you, because this is something that is not just affecting people of one party or another party. This is affecting not only one generation of Americans, but multiple generations of Americans. And we've got to get this thing under control before it continues to crush the next generation.
The computer is going to cut me off in a moment. I really appreciate your time. Really quickly, Tulsi Gabbard, where can people go to learn more about you and your campaign, especially those Democrats and unaffiliateds listening, waiting to make their final decision?
Thanks so much. Please go to Tulsi2020.com. That's TULSI 2020.com, or you can follow me on social media at Tulsi Gabbard. Put out a lot of information on a whole host of issues. Please do come and join us.
Tulsi Gabbard, safe travels. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Look forward to talking with you more.
Thanks. Aloha.
All right. Aloha to you as well, and best of luck. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We're going to take a quick break and wrap up the second hour of the show. Stay with us.